Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar. We're going to give people one more minute to join, and then we'll go ahead and get started. Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar, Preparing Your Cybersecurity Policies for a C3PAO Audit. My name is Kevin Hancock, and I will be the host of today's webinar. Before we get started, I just want to cover a few housekeeping details. So today's webinar is scheduled to last 45 minutes to 1 hour. That will include a Q&A session. That Q&A session will be a large portion of today's webinar. When you signed up for the webinar, we asked if there were any questions, so we'll be covering that list as part of that Q&A session. If for some reason we do have an outage today, just please wait for a minute, then go ahead and refresh the page, and it should start right back up. For your convenience, there is a link in the YouTube description to a glossary of commonly used terms, acronyms, and initializations. We will be addressing a number of those in today's webinar, so just want to make sure you're familiar with those. This webinar is being recorded, and it'll be available on demand via the Exostar resource library. That can be found at www.exostar.com/resources. It can be found that also, if you want to hear this replay post-event, you can also use that same YouTube link you received in the initial email. If you'd like to speak with one of our industry experts or request a copy of this slide deck, please reach out to us at cmmc-team@exostar.com, or if you go to our website, www.exostar.com, there's also a live chat feature, and we'll be more than happy to help you that way as well. So I'm joined on today's webinar by Sean Fornwalt. Sean serves as the Director of Client Technical Support of the Client Technical Support Department at ISMS Solutions. He's also a member of the Policy Pro Development and Quality Assurance teams. So he's certainly the one to give us all the great information that we'll be receiving today. As we get started today, there is a free trial available for Policy Pro. If you'd like to follow along as Sean goes through his demonstration and discusses many of the things you can do within Policy Pro, you can sign up for that free trial. There is a link in the YouTube description. It'll take you about 2 minutes, but you'll be able to follow Sean along live as he goes through a number of these different questions and how to complete your different policies. So with that, I will turn it over to Sean to do the live portion of today's demonstration.
All right, thank you very much, Kevin. So we're going to be taking a look at the live platform. So this is the one that is available at the platform.ismsapplications.com. And we're going to sign in with our email account, or our email address is our username. And then once we go through the registration process, we set up our own password that we use to get into the platform each time we come back. So we're going to go ahead and jump right in and sign into the platform. Now, the first thing after all that registration, once you get through all that, it's going to ask you a very simple question. What standard are we going to be working on today? Are we going to be working on CMMC, or are we going to be working on 171? Now, as we can see, there is a note here saying that the 2.0 of CMMC is coming shortly, and we will get to that in just a couple of minutes. But for today's demonstration, we're going to go into the 171 because this is what the current regulatory standard is for all DoD contractors. So once we make a choice here, this is not a binding choice. We're able to jump back and forth between the two different modules within the Policy Pro platform, and we can do that by coming over to our left-hand navigation here. We can click on the three horizontal lines that will expand it out and allow us to see what different sections are available on Policy Pro. So the first thing that we have is our dashboard. This is going to be the landing page when you come into a particular standard and you're going to be working on your policy documentation for that standard. Now, I had mentioned that this isn't a binding choice when we, choose 171 over CMMC, because as we can see here at the bottom of the main links, we do have a CMMC button, which will take us from the NIST side of the platform over to the CMMC. Now, both of these modules operate on the exact same functionality. They just look differently because we have different identifiers, different, language and things like that. So we want to make sure that everything operates the same way, regardless of what standard you're working with. So what we'll do now is we'll hop back to the 171 and we're going to go over the different parts of the different pages, what they are, how we can use them, and how we can leverage all of this information to start building out good cybersecurity posture for our organizations. So, like I said, the first thing we're going to land on here is the dashboard. This does have a couple of parts. One of them is going to be the welcome message, and we can click on view more and we can see the full thing. This is going to explain to the user what the platform is for, what the basic functionality is, as well as, what the different parts are at a very high level. So we're going to go ahead and get rid of that for the moment. The next thing we see are two questions, and we would, working in this space, we ran into these two questions quite frequently, and people were trying to decide where they were and what they had to do. So the first one is, if you don't have policies and you need help writing them, we recommend you start in the policy builder. Now, this is available through this link right here, or on the left-hand nav, we can click on the Policy Builder, and that will take us to the templates that Policy Pro platform provides. Now, the next question is, if you already have documentation, we recommend that you go to the assessment section and upload your documentation to get a relevant score based upon the standard that you're going into, whether it's 171 or CMMC, and then it will come back out and give you a detailed list of all the concepts that you may have overlooked or need to be addressed within your policy documentation. And again, we can go there through this link right next to the question, or on the left-hand nav, we have our policy assessment. Now, the next thing that we have here is just a nice little feature add that we added in a little bit ago, is our Bloomberg government analysis. So we worked out a deal so that our users and Exostar's users on the platform can read all the articles that we get from Bloomberg government, which are going to be around federal contracting and just general, good information around that working environment. So normally you would have to go through a paywall to get to these, but because we worked out a deal with Bloomberg, we do bring them into the platform so that you can read them at your leisure and, catch up on federal contracting if that's what you want to do. We do send out a weekly newsletter for this to, show you the newest and most relevant articles, and we have a couple of them listed here as well. But what we can do is we can come over to the analysis on the left-hand nav, and we can go and take a look at all the different documents that we have here, or all the different articles. You can adjust how many you see per page. You can do a search. You can do it by either newest first or oldest first. And we are able to, select a category or an industry that we're more interested in, and it will bring those articles up to the top of the list so that you can read what you're interested in and just educate yourself about federal contracting. So with that, we're going to come back to the dashboard and we're going to start in the policy builder. So we're going on the assumption that we don't have policy documentation, or we just want to make sure that we have the right type of documentation and that we're covering everything, but we're not really sure where to start. So what we're going to do now is we're going to hop into the policy builder. Now, each time we come in here, we will come up against a prepare, a gather, and a consult. These will differ slightly between the different policy families or domains, depending upon your standard. And they're just some good information about how we're going to get ready to do this process. So prepare high is going to give you a high level explanation about what this particular document is going to be covering, and what's going to be mentioned and what may be pulled upon from other documents that the organization already has. The gather is a primer list. Now, it's not an exclusive list. You're probably going to have a lot more documentation than is listed here, but it gives you an idea of what types of documents you want to be referring to when you're trying to ask the compliance question or answer the compliance questions from the standard that you're working with. And then, of course, because we understand that is not an IT issue alone. This is a whole of business issue. So we're putting down the consult because you need to be talking with the affected stakeholders within your company, as well as with any third-party contractors, suppliers, primes, whatever, that may come into account when you're looking at your cybersecurity posture and how you want to protect the organization's data. Now, once we have a pretty good idea of what we're going to be doing, what documents we want to be bringing together, and who we should be talking to, we're going to go ahead and hit our Get Started button. So once we do this, we're now going to come into the Policy Builder proper. This is where the template resides on Policy Pro. So what we can do is we have a couple housekeeping items that are optional up at the top. These are the organization name, which was determined at the registration process, and it does get disseminated throughout the language in the template as appropriate. So if, it's saying that we have the ISMS Solutions security policy, okay, that makes sense because my organization name is ISMS Solutions. The next one is our responsible department. This is going to identify which department or group within the organization is going to take on the lead of implementing, maintaining, and enforcing the policies that we've come to state as the position of the organization. Now, a lot of times this will be IT, but it will go to other different departments. Like for physical protection, we're looking at air conditioning, we're looking at physical security, so we may have to bring in a security guards or a security department. So we're just putting that there as this is the department that we go to with any questions. Anybody in the organization who reads the documentation says, hey, I have a question. This is who they would go to. This is the department that is going to be the custodian of this particular policy. And then we have our issue date. Again, helps to create an audit trail of when this document became effective or when this policy was issued for the organization. And then we have the individual or group that is approving. So it's who has the final say as to whether this becomes new company policy or not. And then, of course, we have our tracking number, which you can use as a versioning number. And all this will come out in the export of the document in a table at the very top of the first page. But again, it's not a requirement of the standard explicitly. So if you don't want to have it, you don't have to use it. But with that in mind, we are going to start going into the required parts of a policy and look at how the different sections work and then pull them all together to create ourselves a document. So the first thing that we have to do when we're writing any policy, whether it's cybersecurity, financial, vacation, sick leave, any policy, we have to define why or the purpose of why we're writing this particular policy. Now, on the Policy Pro templates, we do have some generic, language that you can use. You can modify it, and we recommend that you modify it so that it represents what your organization's purpose is for having this particular policy. The DoD told me I had to, doesn't really cut the mustard, so that's why we have this generic language that you can look at, modify as appropriate, and create your own purpose as to why you're writing in this case, our access control policy. So once we've defined the reason why we're doing something, we now have to go into the scope and define who and what. So the scope is going to identify what systems are covered, what devices, what assets of the company, and the who is required to adhere to it. Now, the way that the language is set up here, it does start with all users of the company's information assets. If that's not the case in your organization, you would want to change this so that it best reflects what you're doing at your organization to protect the data that you're using. And that is pretty much the first two parts of every policy that you're going to be creating. Define the purpose, define the scope. So we know exactly who is covered, what is covered, and why we're doing it. And there's no question or, doubt as to why we're doing something. Now, this does become important during the implementation phase because if, say, your senior executives don't buy in to this new implementation, they're probably going to be resistant or hesitant, which is going to trickle down through the rest of the organization, making that implementation step much harder. So that's why we go back and consult with these folks. We're like, here's the proposed policy change, and here's how it might negatively or positively affect the organization. Because if I'm going to implement a control that is going to prevent one of my employees from using a particular piece of software that they have to use for their job, they're likely going to turn off that protection if they can because they want to do their job without any kind of interference. Now, if that was something like antivirus or VPN, we're starting to see where that could become a problem very, very quickly. So we need to make sure that we're identifying why we're doing something, what we're covering, and who has to follow it. And you may get into arguments with owners and CEOs, but they are users of your information system. They are just as likely to be the target of an attack, so they need to be following these rules as well. But the next part that we're going to be looking at is the actual controls from within the standard itself. And what we've done with the NIST side of the house here is that we put together related controls. So because the 3.1.2 derives from the 3.1.1, they're grouped together so that you can look at both of the text editors at the same time if you're going to use the onboard text editor from Policy Pro. So if I want to go ahead and modify the template language or even see what it is, it's very simple to go in and understand that. But the first thing we're going to do is we're going to look. We have the identifier right here. So we know what control we're working with, and we have the language from the standard here as well. This allows you to, confirm that this is what we're working on. These are the requirements in the 171A documentation. So we know that this is what we're working on and we know what requirements we have to meet. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and click on this little black circle icon with the white pencil in it. And this is going to allow us to edit the document in a text editor. Now, full disclosure, this is a very rudimentary text editor. It is not Microsoft Word. So if you're going to want to put images in or graphs or, topology maps, whatever you need to add to your documentation, it's highly recommended that you export the document out to its Word format in a .docx and make your changes from there because you can use the full suite of what Microsoft Word or your equivalent word processor can do. The text editor boxes are here for a quick edit so that you can be like, okay, yeah, this makes sense. I like it. I want to change this. And then they pop out a policy document. So what we can do is we can go and we're just going to, we can highlight something. We can look at what we have here. And there is something missing here that I know will come up when we go to assess this, but I'm going to try to fix that ahead of time. So we have a temporary account, but we don't have an emergency account. Let's see if we could spell today. So we have emergency accounts as well, because we need to have temporary and emergency accounts if we're ever locked out of our own system by ransomware or some other incident that has occurred so that we can try to win back control of our system. So we want to make sure that we're covering everything in the standard, but we also want to make sure that we're writing what we're doing, because if I just say, oh, the best practice is to do A, but that's not what our organization does, and I go through for my certification assessment or I get audited because of an incident, it's a big red flag if your policies don't match your implementation. So we should always be starting from where we are, and then as we build out a more robust cybersecurity suite, we can start to adjust and modify the policies to better reflect what we're doing now. And this is something that is done all the time. You go back, you review your policies because the threats change, software, hardware changes, things like this happen relatively quickly. So we want to be able to go back and review our policy documents to make sure they're up to date. But as we can see, we can make any changes that we want, and then we have to go ahead and hit the save button in order to affect the change. So we're going to go ahead. If we hit cancel, it's going to say, hey, you made a change but didn't save it. Please go back if you want to save it. If not, you can click yes and you're good to go. So we'll hit no and then hit our save. And now we can see that the timestamp here has updated. So it's saying, on the 21st of April of 22, Sean made an update to this particular policy part. This allows you as the user to, if you go back in and it's completely different, you pop back out and you can look at this timestamp and say, oh, Jim, was the last one to do something to this. Let me go talk to him to figure out what changes he made. But once we've gone through and you just keep going down one control at a time, because it is a huge daunting process to do 110 controls if you aren't already part of the way there. And what we've done with Policy Pro is broken it down into more manageable pieces by saying just focus on 3.1.1. Once you're done with that, move on to the next one. And that's how you get through the process. It might take you 6 months, but you're going to get there if you put in the work. So now that we've made a change to our documentation, I'm going to export the document out and we're going to put it into the policy assessment to see how the document has scored. So to export the document out, we are going to click on our export button right here. It's going to give us a success notice that, it has successfully exported. And now this will go to your default download folder, whatever that is in your browser. For myself, it goes to downloads. For you, it may go somewhere else according to your internal policies. But the browser does have the download bar at the bottom, so we can click on this and it will open it up in our word processor, and it will come in protected format, so we need to enable editing. So now if we scroll down, well, before we do that, we can see right here that table. If we don't like this table for whatever reason, it's not your style, it doesn't make sense, it's as simple as right clicking and deleting. Doesn't have to be there. It's there as a tool. If you don't want to use it, we're not going to make you. Because once we've exported this document out, this is our organization's document. It does not belong to Exostar or ISMS. It is your document for your organization. So do with it, organize it however it makes sense for you and your organization. And that's how you should look at the structure and formatting. We've done it by control setup. Again, that's because we do it in manageable pieces rather than saying, I have to write 100 pages on my cybersecurity initiative. Let me start with one control at a time and work my way up to the full 110. But as we can see, if we come down here, the emergency account that we added in is here. But now we're going to go and use the policy assessment to determine where we are with this document. Now we can get here just by coming to the left-hand nav and clicking on the policy assessment button, and this will bring up our policy assessment. So we break this down by policy family or domain for CMMC. So you will put in just your access control policy. And the reason for this is that a lot of concepts for this will mesh or overlap into other policy families. So if I put access control into the wrong section, it's not going to be relevant because it's not expecting it to, be that way. Because if I put it in awareness and training that has 3 controls and access control has 22, I'm going to get a bad score because it's not relevant to what I'm testing it against. So what we're going to do is we're going to come down here to the bottom of our documents that we have. And now one of the things that we do have is that once you have a paid subscription, you can have as many uploads as you want. You can export out templates as frequently as you want to. There's no restriction on what you can do on the platform. Now with our trial, we do limit it to being able to export access control and 3 uploads into policy assessment so that you can kind of get a sense of what's going on and how it works. But once you make that step over to the full subscription, you get every aspect of the platform to use as you wish. But what we're going to do now is hit our upload button right here. We're going to then attach a document. And as we can see, it's going to default to here. I'm going to select my document and hit open. It's now going to apply this document to our upload queue. And then I just have to hit submit. And now we have the arduous task of waiting for a score. So we have our score. It took just a couple of seconds, and now we have a lot of information about this particular document as it pertains to the standard. As we can see, we have a 69.9, so we're just going to say 70 for the simplicity's sake. So we have a 70% on this document. Now, the last time I uploaded one from the same thing, because we can see the 6, so I had one other upload that wasn't, or one other export that wasn't uploaded, but it's only a 0.1% difference between the one I put up on the 8th and the one I put up today. So the scores will fluctuate as you make changes to the documents because that's the way the algorithm works. It may go up a little bit, it may go down a little bit, but it's going to give you the same sense that, is this document relevant to what it should be covering? And the way that we can determine that is that any numerical score above a 50% is telling us that a majority of the necessary items have been addressed. It doesn't mean that they all have, but that a majority of them have been, accounted for. So anything from 50 or 50.1% and up is essentially a good document in air quotes. It's not the best document. It may not be 100% complete, but you're on the right path, and now you just need to work out the other couple of things that you may be missing. Now, the model similarity and the word count here, they're just checks that we do that if you're using one of our templates, have you customized it enough, or is it still a template document? And then the word count is there to say you're not going to cover access control in 500 words. You may want to add some more description or elaborate on what you're doing. Neither of these will necessarily affect the score in any, major way, but they're there as a check for the user to say, well, it's very similar to the template. I should probably customize it, or I need to add something in because it's too short. But again, they're just checks that are there to make sure that you're getting the best information about your document. Now, where the real information and the real power of Policy Pro resides is in the detailed scorecard. So if I come down to this link right here, it's going to say, click to see the detailed scorecard to view the missing key phrases. And that's where the real power of Policy Pro is. So once we click on this, we're going to get an overview of everything we've already seen, from the overall relevance, combining those 3 relevance, model similarity, and word count, as well as our numerical score. But here's where the real fun begins. So as we're coming down, we can now see that we have what's called KENI, or key elements not included. We have 2 types. We have our control specific that are directly mapped to different parts of the standard itself. And then we have our general policy KENIs, which are typically found in a document of this type, and they're more recommendations. So what we're going to do is we're going to jump into the Kennys that we have and then go back to our document and see, are we covering that or did we miss it? So if we come down here, there's one that should be relatively easy to determine. So we have after a predetermined number. This is one of those weird ones that comes up in the system because it's asking you for a specific number of unsuccessful login attempts before an action is taken. So if we read the discussion here from the 171 documentation, that's where this discussion comes from, we can see that we have to have some way of controlling unsuccessful login attempts and so that people aren't being brute forced, to get their password or they're just trying to guess. So we want to determine after a number of times we take an action. Now it's going to tell me that I need to be in 3.1.8, and this is where the organization of the templates really comes in handy. So we can do a control or command F, and we're going to do a 0.8, and it takes us directly to that part of our document. So now we're going to click our cursor so we don't lose it. We'll close our find. And now what we can do, and we just get rid of a couple of things here. Right. There we go. We'll just get rid of this extra language. So as we can see, I've made a bunch of different edits over time, but what we're looking at for this control is very simply how many times can someone consecutively fail to log into their account before an action's taken. And as we can see, where there would be a number or that predetermined number, there are blanks. So we need to go in and fill them out. That way we can say, you know, limit of 5 consecutive invalid login attempts within 2 minutes. And then it'll automatically lock the account for 30 minutes. Maybe you have a mechanism to release that lock early, but this is a good way to stop brute force attacks or someone trying to guess a password versus someone trying to log into their account. And we should have this type of a mechanism in place on all of our systems because it helps to protect that user's credentials and also their access to the data that we're storing. But what we can do now is we've made our change. We can go back out. We can re-upload that saved document, do another assessment. But sometimes we'll find that Kennys will stick around even after we've addressed them. So when this occurs, we want to go ahead and if we're satisfied as an organization that we are meeting the requirements and it's something that we can feasibly undertake, we can ignore a Kenny here or there. And the reason for this is that access control has roughly 250 key concepts that we're looking for through the scoring. And we only have 52 of those that we aren't covering in some way or another. So one or two counties here or there, as long as you're satisfied with what you're putting in place and it meets all the requirements and it follows best practice, you can ignore one or two counties here. So with that in mind, that is how the general functionality of this works. But what I do want to point out, and I do this for every demonstration, is that we have up here a document that is completely blank, right? So this is a completely blank document. There's nothing in it. And when I go to look at the detailed scorecard, this is where we see the 247 different key concepts that the system is looking for. So we're covering 4/5 of the key concepts in the template document itself. So if you use that document to build out and to flesh out your own policy about what you're going to do and what the position of your organization is, it simplifies the process considerably. But that does cover the basic functionality of the Policy Pro platform. And as part of our ongoing effort to continue to improve the software to better serve all of our users, I now want to take a couple of minutes and talk about the 2.0 changes that will be coming to Policy Pro in the very near future. So what we're going to do here is we're just going to minimize this out, and we're going to take a look at how the platform is going to change in like I said, the near future. So the first thing that we see is our select a platform screen. Now, this is slightly different than the one we just looked at because this one, we've combined the 171 and CMMC 2.0 level 2 because they're using the same 110 controls in 171 and in 2.0 level 2. So we've combined those two things together to make it easier for our users. So you don't have to fill out a 171 and then make all the same changes in CMMC because as the current configuration is showing, they are identical in the number of controls and the controls that are being covered. So we've merged them together. But because we've merged the 171 and the level 2 together, we've actually pushed out the level 1. Now, the same functionality would apply. You select which standards you want and you hit the continue button, and then you're able to swap once you're actually in the platform. Now, the other thing that we're going to see as well is that the dashboard has changed a little bit as well. So on the original dashboard for the NIST, we had Ask the Auditor. We've removed that section for the new 2.0 because the auditor that we had, while he was very good at what he did and very knowledgeable, we don't want to confuse folks by having information about the 171 specifically in a policy pro that's combining the two together. That doesn't mean that the Ask the Auditor section won't come back. As we go through this process over the coming months, as we get more certifications done, we can reach out to C3PAOs, to different primes, and all sorts of different folks to reestablish that type of a format of passing on information. But what we can see here is that we do have the same document relevance dashboard. We have some graphical updates to the buttons, and the left-hand nav has changed a little bit. One of the main things that we have now is that instead of just CMMC or 171, we can switch over to the level 1. We can go back to the policy builder for the 1.0, which I'll show in just a second here. But, it's all basically the same with a couple of just updates. One of the big updates that we're doing is that you'll now notice that on the document relevance dashboard table, we have these blue circles. And what they are, and that, I'll make these available through Exostar and everything else, but now it's identifying on the document relevance dashboard what standard did I upload this document into. And as we can see, we have CMMC level 2, we have 2.0 level 2, now we have a 1.0 level 2, 1.0 level 3, and just 2 NIST documents. Because we're merging the two sections together, we're taking all the data that our users have already uploaded to it and combining it together, but we're also identifying it so that this score was under 1.0 or this score was under 171. So now, as you go through the process, you can still use that old documentation, where it comes from, but it allows you to go back to that information and still use it. So we're not removing anything, we're just combining everything together. Now, the other thing that I do want to point out is that as we look at this, and this is just a little bit of a closer view, so we have, like I said, the 2.0, 2.0, 1.0, levels 2 and 3, and then NIST. So this is what's going to be available so that you know what you have to do, what you've already done, and where it comes from. Now, as we're looking at it, we're going to look at the policy. Oh, one second here, slide out of order. So here is the level 1 policy builder dashboard. As we can see, there's not 14 policy families or domains here. What we've done, because we split levels 1 and 2, is that level 1 will only show you what's required for level 1. Currently, what you would have to do is go into a section, go to the level you want, and then it would tell you there's nothing for this level. Now what we're doing is saying, you know what? We're not covering incident response in level 1, so it's not there. This is what this is true in the in the dashboard. It's also true in the policy builder. So we are going to take a quick look now at the policy builder changes. So for level 1, the same thing is true here. We got rid of all the stuff that you don't need for level 1 and only put in what you do need. So these 6 domains will cover all 17 controls for level 1. And then as we can see here, with the level 1 again, it's only the 4 controls in access control that we have to do. There's no extra stuff. We don't have to figure out what we should do, what we shouldn't do. Are we doing too much? Are we not doing enough? Now we can say, if you're doing level 1, here it is. This is what you have to do for level 1. And as we can see, same thing. We have just the policy or the text editor, same function, same setup. It doesn't look any different. Now, as we go back to the level 2 now, we do have all 14 domains available, and you can go in and select with this button right here which domain you're going to be working with. You can click on the domain that you want, and then that will bring up the policy builder again. Same policy builder, different numbers, different order. So as we go through this, we can see all the, the top stuff that we have for the housekeeping. We have our purpose with our edit button. We have our scope. And we also have here, and because this is on our development site, the language is a little bit outdated. But where we had the 997, we're going to be putting in the NFO and NCO controls from Appendix E of the 171 document. But that will be something for a future demonstration, not something for today. But as we can see, we only have, what we have to do in a particular section for level 2. And the text editor remains the same as well. There hasn't been any change to the basic functionality of anything on Policy Pro, but we have made the changes to make it correct as per the 2.0 requirements that we currently have. Now, what happens to all the work that our users have done in CMMC 1.02? They got rid of 20 practices. They did all this rearranging. They moved stuff back to where it used to be. What about all the work I already did? So what we're doing as part of our data migration with this upcoming change is that we've actually made a sub policy builder for the 1.02. So anything that you've already changed in the policy builder will be available on or from the left-hand nav. It's marked as CMMC 1.0, and it will take you into the policy builder for the old CMMC. So if I had written out an asset management document, I spent hours working it out, and I still want to use it, but it's not a requirement anymore, I can get back to that information because we don't believe in just removing something because it's not there, because we believe in document continuity. If we bring other documents in so that we know what the position of the company is or what it was previously, so we can make the appropriate decision as we go forward. And then this is just an example that we can go into the policy builder for the 1.0 and we can still work with the language. We can still make changes. There's just nowhere to upload that document to be scored because the scoring requirements have changed. But that is a very high level look at what the 2.0 changes are going to be. As we get into them in the first couple of weeks of May, we will be coming out and launching the new software once it's gone through all of its QA steps and we make sure that everything is correct. But the other thing that I want to talk about right now, and it only takes a minute, is that as the standard changes, we change with the standard. The site of Policy Pro changes with the standard. And while I don't work with Certification Assistant, I'm pretty sure that they're coming along as well, but I will let Exo talk about that. because it's their baby. But as time goes on, that's why we have the subscription model. We're constantly making changes to the scoring algorithms, to the templates, to the reference libraries and information so that you have the most up-to-date and correct information to make these very difficult decisions going forward. But with that, I will turn it back over to Kevin so we can do our Q&A.
Great. Thanks so much, Sean. Really looking forward to seeing those changes. Let me bring up, there we go. So before I get to the questions, just want to remind everybody there is an exit poll. We'd love you to take a minute and fill that out. There's a link there in the YouTube description. We take this feedback. It helps us drive our this continued webinar series on the topics you want to hear about and the things you're trying to do. So with that, let me go ahead and jump into our Q&A. So let's see, Sean, the first question I've got is, do subcontractors get audited or only primes?
Yes.
Exactly. It's both, right?
Right.
If you've submitted information into the government system, there is an opportunity that you may be chosen to be audited. So be prepared. Let's see. Okay, so another question. Does all the supporting infrastructure for a CUI app also need to be contained inside the Enclave? Or can the Enclave simply allow the necessary ports to be open to other parts of the corporate environment? Sean, you want to answer that? You want me to take it?
Yeah. No, so as long as you have properly documented the flow of the data through the network,
Yep.
it's a maybe, but that's one of those things that I would rather err on the side of caution and have
Yep.
it within the enclave. But again, that's going to be a very, very case specific answer.
Yeah, and this is really, it comes down to how do you describe that system, right? It does go down that system security plan, the boundaries you put around that. Now, there are specific things that are often called out in your system security plan about network monitoring tools and SIEM systems, et cetera, that may act upon those systems. Now, those may be outside the boundaries that and they're just gathering information from those and accounts, et cetera. So as Sean mentioned, it really just depends kind of on where you're building that boundary, the other systems that are involved in the monitoring, et cetera. But you do need to take all those things into consideration when you're building your policies.
Absolutely.
Got a question around training. So does CUI training as per NIST 800 compliance need to be professionally done by a third party, or can the organization have individuals within it perform that training?
If you have somebody that has the expertise to do that
Yeah.
training, then that should be okay. I don't believe there's any strict requirement about training.
I don't think there is anything. There is no need to. There is no certification, training certification, if you will, around this.
Right. You can't go out and get your Six Sigma and
Right.
in CUI.
Yep.
But the only thing that I would recommend, because just reading the 171 itself is not enough,
Yep.
I would highly recommend looking at the NARA marking guidance for CUI, because that's going to be the best document to get that information from.
Good point. Good point.
Which is available on the Policy Pro reference library.
Okay. I have a question about POAMs. So how do you actually put the POAM in place?
You
Now,
fill it out and
so
maintain it.
Yeah, exactly. So remember, the POAM really tells you if you haven't implemented one of the policies, the POAM says what you're going to do to implement that. It tracks your completion of that implementation plan. So if you will, it's kind of just that portion of, or the milestone, if you will, that's the M in the POAM, is that when you're going to be implementing that control.
Right.
So, you know,
I
and I
mean,
would, I'm sorry, go ahead.
yeah, a really great example is I just talked with a couple of guys at a firm that they were looking through and they're trying to determine, they're like, you know, we're using two-factor. And I was
Yep,
like, that's good. I mean, that's a -3 on the Spurs test, but that's good. But you really should be doing multi-factor. So what you would do is say, we currently use two-factor. Here's our plan to implement multi-factor so that in the event of an incident or an assessment, you can say, we're aware of an issue. Here's our timeline to fix it and our resourcing and everything else. So it's not like, oh, you found a problem and I don't know about it or I don't know how to handle it. It's we're aware of it and we're dealing with it.
absolutely. Okay, so here's a question we get almost every webinar, but I want to continually emphasize this because it does get asked at every webinar. So it asks if we have an SSP that we believe is complete, and we think we're ready for a CMMC audit, do we need to have the cybersecurity policies written down?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Um,
there's basically it provides evidence of intent, right?
right,
It's not we just kind of threw these controls in place and let them go. It's no, we took time and actually looked at how this is going to affect our system, how it's going to affect our users, et cetera, and it was a purposeful decision, not just it happened to be there.
right. And it's one of those where, you know, and I think sometimes this gets confused with that self attestation, right? There's the question of yes, we do these things and we can self attest that we do. That's great, but you've still got to write down what you're doing. You're still self attesting to something that you're doing. So write them
Yeah,
down,
and yeah,
understand
and I
them.
mean, I actually worked with a firm that their entire business got shut down because somebody sent the wrong email, the wrong file to the wrong person,
Yeah,
right? And they had everything they needed. That like their controls were in place, they were using the right firewall software, everything, right? It was done correctly. But simple human error caused an audit and they failed their audit because they hadn't documented anything.
mm,
So it doesn't matter if you have it done correctly. If it's not documented as that was the intent, then you're most likely going to fail an audit.
excellent. So let's see. Got it. Have a let's okay. Oh, here we go. So my customer requires my company to furnish their Spurs score. Where do I start?
You would start with the NIST SPRS testing methodology documentation.
Yep.
That's going to walk you through the whole process, what you have to do, what you have to meet, and all that kind of stuff.
Yep. And this is where I'll make another plug for Exostar Certification Assistant. That what Certification Assistant does is it walks you through those NIST 800 171 controls, allows you to tell it, if you will, what you've implemented, what you haven't. It generates that SSP and that POEM and generates the Spurs scores that's associated with how you answered those questions. You then can go into the Spurs system, you can submit your score there, and then report to the prime that's asking, yep, I've done it. So we can wrap
Key
all this
addition
up.
though, Kevin,
Yep,
you can always resubmit.
exactly. Yeah. And that's really what those poems are, right? Because at the end of the day,
Right.
you're gonna get those that SSP, the poems that are associated with that with that system security plan. Then those poems say when you're going to implement those things you haven't done, and every time you've knocked one of those down, you should go in and resubmit your score because your score should go up.
Right, right. But the other thing too is that it's a requirement
Yep.
of the NFOs under Appendix E that you have a policy, but it's also a requirement that you're reviewing it on a regular frequency.
Right. Yep.
So it's a requirement, but more importantly, the threats that we face in the theater of operations change daily. So
Absolutely.
our policies, our cybersecurity protections from 3 or 6 months ago may not be sufficient, and we need to bolster them.
That's right. Okay, so interesting question here, and I when I read it, I was like, well, that's probably good, but I don't know of any. So it's are there auditing tools available to access each of the CMC levels and provide monitoring and alerting if a control is misconfigured? I don't know of anything that comprehensive.
Best thing I could say would be like a SOC, but I mean, you would have to be doing manual reviews of everything or programmatic, reviews of everything.
Yeah,
It's, yeah, I don't know of any good products that do that. I know that people would ask that about Policy Pro, like, hey, does this go through my system? And it's like, no, it's a cloud-based thing. The only thing that touches your system is what you export, and it doesn't go into your system because A, that's a huge risk to go
yeah,
into somebody else's system or to let someone else in.
yeah. Just remember that these 110 controls across these 14 families touch a lot of different pieces. Not all of it, if you will, automated per se, because some of the controls are around training uh, and the not the reauthorization, but the review of all the policies and things like that. So
Right.
it's those kinds of things are not necessarily made for kind of an automated thing. There are a number of different IT tools out there that monitor logs and alert you if if files are moved or if large amounts of data are transferred in and out and things like that. But I don't know of any that are particularly tuned to CMMC. So audience out
Right.
there, if you know anything, please let us know at CMMC at exostar.com so we can get the word out there.
Right. Right. And the other thing too is that the problem with automating an audit process is that it may completely overlook something that it wasn't looking for because it
Yep.
wasn't programmed to look for it. Whereas a human reviewing it would go, that doesn't make any sense. Why is that way? And then they'll go and try to fix it, where the computer will just be like, yeah, it looked okay.
Yeah.
That's
Excellent
why
point.
even with our machine learning and algorithms for our relevance scoring, we always recommend go back into the document, compare it, make sure that you're meeting your company's requirements above listening to what the machine learning tells you. Because
Yep.
again, it's machine learning. Any kind of automated tool like that is going to go into machine learning or into AI, and those things learn not always what we want them to.
Yep. Okay, just want to before we go on and finish up the Q&A session here, just want to remind everybody one more time, if you could please go to that exit poll and fill out that exit poll, we'd really appreciate it. During this time is a great time to do that. You'll see that link in the YouTube description. Again, just appreciate any and all feedback we can get. So this is another one of those questions that we get almost every time, and it really is kind of that the company size question, right? So this question came in. It's I'm a one-person company and I do HR consulting and personal development coaching for executives. What am I required to do?
Two questions.
Yep.
One, do you work with or have a DoD contract or contractor? Two, do you handle CUI? The answer is yes
Yep.
and then no, it's level 1. If it's yes and yes, it's level 2, unless you're a larger research laboratory where you may need to go to level 3.
Right. And it's really and it's what I always tell everybody is start with your contract, right?
Right,
Look at the contracts you've signed. They'll the indicator that you need to start paying attention to this is if you've got those DFARS clauses, the 7012, 70 7012, 7019, 7020, etc., where where it expects you may be getting or you may be seeing CUI data.
right.
And then figure out from there which of these things you need to be and what level you're at.
Yeah, and also the only other thing I'd add is that it doesn't hurt to ask your contracting officer,
Right.
right?
Yeah,
Put
and
the
we get
onus on them to identify what is the CUI I have to handle.
right. And that's the other thing to remember. The primes, if you've got, if you're a subcontractor for a prime, we often at Exostar, since we also work with that entire community, we know that the primes are out there wanting to talk to you. If you've got a question, please ask them. They're more than willing to help and let you know kind of what it is, what parts of the contract, what CUI data might flow down, et cetera. So please, ask them as well. So just wanted to remind everybody that along with Policy Pro, Exostar also has Certification Assistant. If you'd like to try Certification Assistant, if you're struggling on that self-assessment, that SPUR scores, etc., this is where Certification Assistant can help you. It can help you generate that score, that SSP, and that POAM list. So, and there's also a free trial for this application as well.
And one of the other benefits to the CA system is there are requirements where you have to list out every authorized user, every device, every piece of software. If you put it into CA, it helps completing that process much simpler.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And with both Policy Pro and Certification Assistant, it really is all about helping you navigate and get started, right? We understand that this can be a very daunting task, and these things are there just to, just to lighten that burden a little bit, let you know what to do, get you started, etc. So, the webinar series that this one is part of is an ongoing event. We have a number of these webinars every month. We've got another one coming up next week that, again, I'm hosting with both Mike Baker of GDIT, one of the primes, if you will, and Tim Brennan, a partner of Exostar. So they'll be going over some great information. We've also got a list of additional resources out there to help you along this journey. Again, just want to remind everyone, please take that exit poll. Please go ahead and fill that out. And I just want to thank everybody for joining us today. I want to thank Sean for his participation and for driving the majority of this session today. And thank you all for joining us today. Have a great one.
Right. And just remember, if you're still needing some help, we do have our one-on-one sessions every Tuesday and Friday.
That's right. Thanks so much for reminding me, Sean. Everyone have a great day.